Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Shoshana Ort and my voice is pretty much lost, but I didn't want to cancel tonight's live because I think there was another one that was canceled tonight. So I hope you'll bear with me while I try to speak, and my voice is really not so pleasant to listen to. So I hope that it will be okay to be hearing this live tonight. It will probably be shorter than my usual one because it's hard for me to talk and I don't think it's so easy to hear me. So with that introduction, I'm gonna start talking about when anxiety comes from trauma. So in the last live that I did, I was talking about different pathways to anxiety and the reason why it's so important to know where your anxiety stems from, because if you know where your anxiety is coming from, it's much easier for you to be able to take control of your anxiety and not let it hold you back from what you want to do. Now, I want to just go back a step and ask, what is the purpose of anxiety? Like, why is it there? Why do we have it? We see that in today's day and age, so many people are debilitated from anxiety. They just feel like they cannot achieve their goals. They cannot do things that they want to do. It inhibits them from doing either work activities or socializing when they know that that's really good for them, or other activities, or their job, or it depends on the extreme of the anxiety. But anxiety, a lot of times we find, especially in today's day and age, is holding us back from achieving a lot of our goals. And the question is, what is the anxiety there for? The reason why I'm asking this question is because if we understand why anxiety is there and what it's doing for us, it can be easier for us to accept the fact that we have it, and then be able to work forward from there. So the purpose of anxiety is actually to save us. It's to keep us safe and to save our lives, to keep us alive. And we have, as a human race, we have had anxiety since the beginning of time. And the only reason why we are alive today is because our ancestors had anxiety, believe it or not. So if our ancestors did not have anxiety, then they would have died, and then we would not have been here today. So then we would not be here today. So what does that mean exactly? So the role of anxiety is, the role of the part of anxiety in our brain is to be looking around all the time and seeing if there are dangerous situations that are coming up, and the brain, specifically the cortex and the amygdala, will react and respond in a way to try to keep us safe from that situation and thereby keep us alive. Now, that's the extreme. So if you think of many hundreds of years ago, when people were traveling across the country and trying to find a home for themselves, if they saw an animal coming to get them, they had to be able to think fast. Now, without anxiety, the animal also has to do this, by the way. That's why it's called the animal brain or the lizard brain. That's the anxiety response. That's the amygdala response to anxiety and to dangerous situations. But in the olden days, if a person saw an animal coming at them, then they would have to do one of the three. They would have to do fight, flight, or freeze, which is the responses of the anxiety responses. And if people would not do that, then they would have either gotten eaten alive, or they would be very, very badly hurt. And they could still get very badly hurt, even if they have these anxiety responses. But the actual anxiety response is there, implanted in us since the beginning of time, to keep us safe and to keep us alive. Now, fast forward a number of years, or we could actually go back to let's still keep talking about hundreds of years ago, when they were trying to set up something like a house for themselves. So if someone did not have any anxiety, they would not realize that what they were building, a house that they were building, was too close to a lake or a stream. And then if it was raining, if there was a big rainstorm or something like that, their house would be flooded or they would drown. So it's only because of anxiety that our ancestors survived, and it's only because our ancestors survived that we actually survived. So there's a part of us that we really actually need anxiety in order to stay alive. The anxiety is there to kick off and help us stay safe in an uncertain situation. Now, there are a lot of different forms of anxiety, and there are a lot of different responses to anxiety, and a lot of different triggers to anxiety. So, for example, there's, just in terms of anxiety, there's OCD, and there's PTSD, and there's GAD, general anxiety disorder, and SAD, which is social anxiety disorder. There are so many different anxiety disorders. Then there's also other types of trauma, which is what I'm going to get to in just a minute. But actually, I'll just say right now, there's trauma that someone has been through, like a big traumatic experience, like Lowly knew someone being killed or shot, or someone being in a fire, or someone being handled inappropriately, or someone being very, very sick, or and there are those large types of traumas that everyone usually categorizes as like, oh yeah, that's a real trauma. Then there's other types of traumas, which are small stressors that are every single day coming up in a person's life that are making them see the world in a negative light. Those are actually considered trauma as well. And then there's also secondary trauma, which is when someone else has gone through trauma and it is affecting you sorry, because someone else, or that you know, or that you've seen has happened, something that you know has happened to someone else, or somebody, or a different set of people or something, and you feel traumatized from that. So there's a lot of different types of trauma, and there's also a lot of different types of anxiety. Where does this all play in, and how can we deal with these types of anxieties and trauma, and how can we progress in our regular lives and bring ourselves back to somewhat of normalcy in a time of craziness and chaos? So one of the things that our brain is trained to do, and it's to try to help us in a positive way, is to try to figure out certainty with uncertainty. Meaning that one of the ways, if you think about many, many years ago, if people were trying to survive, the best possible chance that you have of surviving is, well, you have to fit in. So we could talk about that, about like how that plays out in today's day and age. You would have to fit into the crowd, because if you don't fit in, or you're not able to keep up with the crowd that you're in when you're traveling through a desert and trying to find a place to like make your home, you're going to be left behind, and that, in other words, means that you're not going to make it. So anxiety will definitely kick in very strongly when someone feels like they don't fit in, or that they don't belong, or they're not able to keep up with the crowd. That's definitely going to be anxiety provoking, and it's going to make all the sirens in the brain go off like very, very strongly. Another thing that causes the sirens to go off is when something very uncertain happens, and a trauma in the world happens, where we're trying to make sense of something that we're not able to make sense of. So this is on a very large scale, but there's like a war going on, and people are going in, soldiers are going in, and there was a terrorist attack and a pogrom, and there have been so many terrible things that have been going on. And the brain, in order to try to survive and get through it, its natural response is to have an anxiety response. And that has been what has been the response for people since day number one, that we have to try to make sense of the insensible. Now, one of the ways that people actually try to do this is to try to figure out as many details as possible, which is actually not the proper way to deal with anxiety, but it's like a pseudo way of dealing with the anxiety, because when there's a trauma and something that people are trying to make sense of, they want to make sure that that's not trying to make sense of what's going on. And let's go back to thousands of years ago, when people were trying to make a life for themselves. If there was something that was going on in their life, in the desert or in the forest or whatever, and they didn't know what was going on, the chances of them being able to survive that were very, very few. It was very limited. It was very, very small. Think about that. So the brain automatically is going to try to figure out what is going on, and how can I prevent this from happening to myself, and how can I take charge of this situation. So I think that's one of the reasons why so many people were inclined to, and a lot of people were not able to come the temptation of looking at social media and seeing horrific videos of things that were going on, because they wanted to know details, and which is the pseudo way and of the body feeling like it's in control, that you know what happened, and then now you can make sure that that won't happen to you. But as a result of that, instead of that happening, people were self-traumatizing themselves, because they were seeing these images of horrific things that the brain and the body are not able to make sense of, which is a trauma to and within the body in itself. And the question is, how can you deal with that anxiety now? So I want to point out that when you have an anxiety response, when anything is coming up that's going to cause you to feel anxious, your amygdala and your cortex are usually involved, meaning the amygdala is always involved when you're feeling anxious. I'm sorry. The amygdala is always involved, and like I was talking about in the last time, and I realized that it's backwards because this is a Instagram live, so you're seeing everything backwards. But there's a sensory information. So let's just say you heard that there was a terrible attack in Israel. So that's sensory information. That's going to go to the thalamus. This is just what's going on for right now. That's going to go into the thalamus, and it's either going to go into the cortex to tell the cortex, oh my gosh, this was very scary information that we have to process. And then it's going to activate the amygdala and say, okay, now I have to respond in an anxious way to try to get over this. Now, even though it's something that was far away and it might not seem like it was specifically related to us, the body is still going to respond in the same way. And the amygdala only has 3 responses that it is actually able to respond with. The responses are fight, flight, or freeze. Now, that might sound really simple, and a lot of people might know that, but what exactly does that mean? What exactly does it mean that the anxiety responses of the amygdala are fight, flight, or freeze? And it's important to understand this, because so many times people are feeling these feelings of anxiety, real anxiety, like their eyes are they're like not able to move, they're feeling debilitated, or they're nauseous, or they're having stomach upset, they're having diarrhea, or they're starting to sweat, and their heart rate is going really, really fast, and they're like, why is this happening to me? Like, nothing is really scary, like, what's going on? Why this is not helping me? This is just getting in the way of me trying to like get along with my day. But I want to just take a moment and help you understand what fight, flight, or freeze actually means. So what fight, flight, or freeze actually means is that when the amygdala is activated, it sets off the sympathetic nervous system, and when that happens, your pupils dilate and your salivatory system weakens, because you don't need to be eating when you're trying to save your life. That's not one of the things that needs to happen. So that's why a lot of people, their eyes get bigger to try to save them from a predator, let's just say, to try to see like what's going on over here, like what is going on. If you see someone in a state of shock, and a lot of times you'll notice that their pupils are humongous. Their pupils are dilated, and they're just in a state of shock like this, the way that I look right now a little bit. But the reason for this is because it's really from the original time that we've gotten, since the time that we've had anxiety, which has been forever, since the beginning of time. That's because the fight, flight, or freeze response has been activated, and the sympathetic nervous system has been activated, and it's trying to save your life. So whether it's like a smaller thing or a larger thing, with a trauma, it's usually on a larger scale. These things are going to happen. So a lot of times people will feel that their mouth is dry because they don't need to be eating at the time that they're trying to save their life, in terms of like, oh my gosh, do I need to eat right now? A lot of times also they're going to feel nauseous because the digestive system is trying to actually get out as much as it can so that it could run as fast as it can. So fight, flight, or freeze, that would be under flight. And that's why a lot of people feel nauseous when they are feeling anxious, because their anxiety is at work, and their amygdala is activated, and so is their sympathetic nervous system, and their body is just preparing themselves for trying to survive this scary, maybe life-threatening situation. The bronchi in the lungs also get expanded to help you run. But that also makes you hyperventilate, and it inhibits your stomach from activity. So all these different things are happening when someone is going through a trauma. And a trauma could mean something, again, it could be something very big that you went through that like everyone's like, oh yeah, that's traumatic. It could be small things that were happening all the time. It could be a message that felt very off to you and made you feel worse about yourself as a child, and now has been ingrained as a part of you and the way that you believe in yourself as a person. And that could create either trauma or anxiety or a feeling of not being good enough, which is also another type of anxiety. And you deal with that in similar ways that you deal with anxiety, and learning how to relearn how to look at yourself and have a positive feeling about the way that you who you are and who you represent and who you are in your life. And so many things are happening in our bodies in order to try to help save us. Now, the problem is in today's day and age that the anxiety is so strong because we're constantly feeling these feelings of anxiety or trying to save ourselves either in social situations or trying to keep up. And in today's day and age, with such fast moving technology and social media and so many things grabbing our attention and needing us to keep up with a very, very, very fast-paced world, that could be equated to someone trying to keep up with the gang when they're traveling through a forest and trying to see if they could survive. So just because it doesn't seem necessarily on the surface like it's the same thing, it very much at the core is the same thing, because we're trying to survive. That is what our anxiety is trying to do. Now, there are different ways to deal with the anxiety and to deal with the amygdala and help calm it down, because like I was saying last time also, that it goes from the thalamus to the cortex to the amygdala, but sometimes the amygdala will trigger the cortex to think even more deeply and more imaginative about everything that's wrong with what's going on and the uncertainty of where we are. So right now we do always live in a very uncertain world. Like we don't really know what tomorrow's going to bring. At the end of the day, that's the real truth. But most people who are not suffering from debilitating anxiety and trauma are able to move past that and say, like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm still able to live a regular life and be productive. But then when something big comes in and shakes that core of feeling stable and feeling like, okay, more or less I know what's going on in my life or what's going to happen or what's going to be, that's a sense of trauma, and the body is feeling very insecure and unstable right now and is going to try to make sense of it. So a lot of therapists have been saying, like, make sure to go and exercise, make sure to go and take care of yourself, make sure to give yourself space, but I'm not sure if everyone's understanding the significance of these pieces of advice. And some of the things that these pieces of advice are trying to help you with is that it's trying to help calm the amygdala down. It's trying to help calm the sympathetic nervous system, which has been activated in a lot of people now that there has been like a world trauma, and people are feeling very, very insecure. And because of that, we want to try to take care of ourselves as best as possible in a way of eating well, which, by the way, we could get into a whole different I could give a whole different live about that when we eat sugary things and things that are soaked in unhealthy oils. Those are actually things that are they make things inflate, and those are anxiety producers. Anytime that we bring something in to our bodies that is like an inflator or makes something blow up, which is like sugars and unhealthy oils, that's an anxiety. It produces anxiety and depression. So we want to really try our best to try to sleep as well as we can, be relaxed before we go to bed as much as we can. Now, the anxiety is going to sometimes get in the way of this. It is a lot of times going to get in the way of this, but if the anxiety is getting in the way of you being able to sleep, then the one of the things that you would want to try to do is like put your phone away a good hour, if not more, before you go to bed, and just put on something relaxing to listen to, and try to be able to distract yourself in this time so that your sympathetic nervous system can calm down so that you can fall asleep. And hopefully the good sleep will be able to help you with the anxiety in the following day, and help you be able to function in a more normal way when you're going through a very uncertain time. So I hope this helps people gain some clarity on what's happening in our bodies and brains when someone has gone through trauma or secondary trauma, and how to deal with it and understand it so that you're not getting harder and harder on yourself and thinking, what's wrong with me? What is wrong? Like, how am I going to get out of this? And I can't function. Hopefully that this talk is able to help people function better, understand what's going on with them, with you, and so that you can have a little bit more self-compassion and understanding on what's going on, that you're very, very normal, and everybody experiences anxiety to some extent, and the anxiety is actually there to help us. So I want to wish you luck, and we'll see you next time.